Let's look at a feather with a difference from VB Swordshop, and swingers are going to love this. What on earth is Matt talking about? Well, you're going to find out in a minute. So I'm Matt Easton, Schola Gladiatoria series of fencing clubs, and I've been sent this nice feather with a roll tip. They've got different tip options, and it's got all the distal taper you want, and it's quite a nice nimble feather. So we're going to be looking at how this performs in the club in a minute, but it has a unique feature. So you've seen feather before, and there's various different manufacturers you can get feather from. So this is VB Swordshop's offering. These come in at €280 for just the straight up feather. And so far, it all looks good. I'm going to put it through its paces and we'll see how it performs as a feather in a second. But the most important thing to note about it is, unlike most other feather, it has an Allen key or Allen wrench, depending what you want to call it, connection at the top, and this means that the sword can be dismounted. Now, you might want to dismount it because you might want to replace the blade, which is great because a peened version, so riveted essentially at the end. It's more of a hassle to replace the blade if the blade breaks. With this, you can just get a replacement blade. But moreover, it's also really good for transport purposes. And, you know, in the modern world, whether you're traveling on trains, planes, or automobiles, having something which packs down a little bit more easily and less conspicuously as a weapon, particularly in the UK or on aeroplanes, is a really good thing. So the fact that you can undo that and take the blooming great crossguard, and anyone who's transported long swords or rapiers around the world knows these things are a pain in the butt, sometimes literally, and you can dismount it, take it all off, and it no longer really looks like a sword. So you've got your bits, you can put them in the bag separately, or indeed for shipping purposes, and it means it takes up a lot less space. So that's really good. Replacement of parts, really good. You can change the pommel and change the guard, change the grip, whatever you want to do. So being able to dismount that has some great advantages to it. And it's a very secure attachment as well. So I just pulled out the Allen key here. So I'm just going to demonstrate this on screen. So that bit is essentially a nut in the end. There we go, that's probably enough. Probably do the rest, there we go, the rest with my fingers. So that is essentially a recessed nut. Let's have a look in there. There we go, so there's the end of the tang. We put that nut somewhere safe, and then the pommel itself is also screwed. So it's not that that nut is holding everything together. Actually, it's a screw-on pommel that then has another screw-on nut at the end. And there we go, unscrews. It's threaded for quite a long distance, so quite a lot of tang there. And then once we've come there we go, we now find, there we go, off comes the grip. Fairly simple, leather covered wooden grip. I assume it's wood anyway. Oh, maybe it's plastic looking inside it. Yeah, it might be. But anyway, it's leather covered grip. A lot of feathers actually use synthetic grips instead of wooden ones these days because they're more durable. And then interestingly, the guard and the ferrule are connected. And there you go. There's your bare blade. Now, the unique thing about this is, and this is where swingers are going to get really excited, okay? That is longsword swingers, and this is a swing sword, as it's sometimes known, or indoor sword. You'll notice it has a blade, but not a blade. And this is something which is really useful for people who want to train indoors. So if you can't get outside, you know, if it's horrible weather, or you want to train while you're watching television, or you just live in an apartment block and you don't have a garden or whatever, then you can take your hilt, you can mount it all up, just exactly the same as it goes onto the tang of the blade. Screw, screw, screw. It screws for quite a long time, this pommel. I'm sure this is absolutely riveting, riveting YouTube content here. Oh, there we go. There we go. Got all the way in. I achieved full penetration. No, I'm not going to make that joke. Right. Then the nut goes on the end. I won't screw it all the way in just for demonstration purposes. And then you end up with this. Now you might think, well, what use is that for practicing with? These are very clever. Because of the amount of mass and the distance it is away from the hand, it gives you the illusion of moving a blade because it simulates the point of balance and the inertia of having a blade. Now, I've trained with these things in the past, And I've had a few of these over the years actually. And one thing I have to point out is you can get, if you train with these too much, you can get a false sense of security because there isn't a blade sticking out here. And you can do motions that go through bits of your body and through your head. Oh look, I'm doing this about a cow that would take my head off. So you have to use a bit of common sense and you have to sort of imagine where the blade is projecting in your movements and get your hands in the appropriate positions. But these things do move like the real sword, and if you close your eyes, I'm not BSing you, 100%. They do feel exactly the same as having a blade on the end. So it does mean that you can be there in your kind of confined spaces and still be training. You could train in bed. So there we go, a great idea. And I think there are a lot of advantages to having dismountable hilts like VB are offering here. Obviously the links are all down below to these products. So the links are down below to VB Swordshop. You can also get these, I think, through Purple Heart in the USA. But the sword itself is €280, if I've read correctly. And you can get the additional swing if you want to have the inside trainer for it as well, the indoor sword blade, which obviously you don't need two hilts. You can get just that by itself for a further €100. If you just want the indoor training one, then I think it's about €200, €210 on their website, but you can check the link down below. So you can get that with a hilt if you want, or you can get the full feather with a replacement blade. So let's have a look and see how does the feather stand up and what do my club mates think about it as a training sword. So it's been a couple of weeks since we tested this out, and it was used by numerous people in the club. So how did it stand up? Well, as you can see, it's still in one piece, as you'd hope. You wouldn't expect a feather to perish that quickly, but it did well. There are some constructive feedback things here. It didn't escape unscathed, as we'll come to in a second. But first up, handling was great. Okay, so one of the things, I think the most positive, there are two really positive things to say about this as a feather. The first thing is that people really liked how this handled. The weight distribution, the distal taper. It has to be said, a lot of feather on the market don't actually really have distal taper. A lot of them are just a flat, and they have a bit of taper in this direction, and that's what gives them the flex in the second half of the blade. But this actually has visible distal taper. It is thicker here than it is here. That distal taper really helps with its handling. It's a very nicely handling sword. Now, admittedly, part of this is also because it's pretty light. It weighs 1,375 grams, which for a longsword is quite on the light side. A lot of feather out there are more like 1,500 or higher. For reference and comparison, this Caveton here is 1,620 and this Siggy here is 1,640. So that does mean that the VB Swordshop feather is pretty light at 1,375. That being said, it was very nice to use. It was very light and nimble. I think people appreciated that it it was a little bit quicker and didn't hit so hard. So that's something to bear in mind, whether you want a lighter sword or a heavier sword. And of course, those other companies like Caveton or Siggy or whoever do make lighter versions as well. So fundamentally, just so you know, one of the reasons that this handles really nimbly and really nicely is partly because it's lighter. Now for me, I think the second big bonus about this sword, and a really good thing I liked, was the hilt construction method. We have no problems whatsoever with things coming loose. The fact that the pommel screws on and then you have a nut on the end means that everything stayed absolutely tight and secure. And I love the idea that if a blade breaks, you can just dismount it and replace the blade easily, or indeed you can switch it for that swing, which if you buy it by itself, I think it's about €100. So you can swap those things out, or you could have different guards. You could have side ring or complex guard or different styles of pommel. And I like the fact you can chop and change. And of course, as mentioned, I think it's a big advantage for transportation as well, and postage, it has to be said, over the peen construction. Now, I do personally prefer a peen construction from a traditionalist point of view, but from a modern world point of view, I do think the screwed construction is probably more practical. Another thing we really liked about this was that the guard is hardened. Now, they're not the only company making hardened guards, VB Swordshop, but this is a hardened guard and it stood up very well. So it didn't bend, it didn't take any sort of gouging or things like that. So overall, from a practicality point of view, a hardened guard these days is much better than a mild steel guard. Now the drawbacks, and there were two main ones to note. The first one I've already showed you, I've already spoiled. So you will notice that the leather received at least 2 blows, one there, during fighting. That often happens with longswords because you've got a gap between the hands and you've got protective gloves on, so sometimes your hand or the glove gets hit, but if it gets hit between the hands, then that can happen to the leather. Now this isn't unique to VB Swordshop. I've seen this happen with other makes of feather. That being said, I didn't see it happen quite as dramatically as this, and I think that's due to 2 things. One, this is a plastic grip underneath, and certain other manufacturers use wooden grips underneath. Now, with wood, it tends to take a dent and doesn't sort of skip up. I think because the plastic's very hard, actually that kind of accentuates the damage to the leather because it kind of hit there and ripped upwards. So that's kind of disappointing, and also particularly so because the leather itself is actually really nicely fitted and stitched. It's got, you know, it's got risers, it's got this really good fold. So it would be kind of galling, I think, if you had a nice sword, new sword, and you were like, oh, the leather's really nice. Literally, this happened in the first session. So that's your leather ruined in the first sparring session, and, you know, in, let's say, 20 minutes that happened. So that would be a bit galling. Now, to mitigate that, I know that VB Swordshop are going to, I don't know if they currently do, but they're going to be offering these with cord wrap, which is more durable, instead of leather. And I also know that Purple Heart, I believe, cord wrap these in America. So they import these and they cord wrap them there. So if you're buying through Purple Heart Armory, for example, then they would be cord wrapped. Anyway, just, you know, full disclosure. The second thing is, and this isn't a big thing, we did notice, so this went up against feathers made by other companies such as Coveton and Reginier, and we did find that the steel of this was a little bit softer, just a little bit softer, such that we did get a little bit of burring, and I actually got a metal splinter in my finger when I tested the edge. I was like, oh crap, I got a tiny little piece of metal in there. So that does indicate that this is possibly slightly softer in its heat treatment. Now, I'm sort of reluctant to massively criticize it for that because a slightly softer blade is probably less likely to snap. Okay, but there's a balance there. But anyway, just to be aware, and it's tiny, it's only very slightly, it's not like there's any big burrs or anything like that. It was a tiny, tiny bit. Maybe it got caught, maybe it was unlucky, I don't know. But overall, you can see that the blade's in pretty good condition. So, to conclude, I do think this is a really good product. I think the major thing that they need to do is cord wrap those grips. I'm not sure whether I'm a fan of plastic grips or not yet. I know many companies are using plastic grips instead of wooden grips now. I have heard some people complain that they can lead to more rattling, but then again, wood can compress more, so that could lead to more rattling. So I'll let you decide on that. But overall, I do really like this feather. I think it's well worth considering. I love the construction. I love the fact that you can swap it out for that indoor training, indoors, you know, swing as I call it, but indoor training blade that's not a blade. That's nice, and I really like the dismantleable construction. So thanks once again to VB Swordshop, link down below, for sending this, and obviously they've got other products to check out there, and hopefully this has given you enough information to decide whether one of these might be the feather for you. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. I have been Matt Easton. I will continue to be, and I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers, folks! Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.